Zootopia 2 has come home to Disney+.
Let's go!
Get ready for a new case.
We're the greatest partners of all time!
New friends.
Gary the Snake.
And your last name?
The Snake.
Dream Team.
New habitats.
Zootopia has a secret reptile population.
You can watch the record-breaking phenomenon at home. Zootopia 2, now available on Disney+, rated PG. And right now you can get Disney Plus and Hulu for just $4.99 a month for 3 months with a special limited time offer. Ends March 24th. After 3 months, plan auto-renews at $12.99 a month. Terms apply.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Adobe Acrobat Studio, your new foundation. Use PDF spaces to generate a presentation. Grab your docs, your permits, your moves. AI levels up your pitch, gets it in a groove. Choose a template with your timeless cool. Come on now, let's flex those tools. Draft, design, deliver, make it sing. AI builds the deck so you can build that thing. Do that, do that, do that with Acrobat.
Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-acrobat.
Wonder-working power in the precious...
Incredible as they seem, are not the results of mass hysteria.
You may wish to adjust the dial you are currently tuned into.
The wrong station. Chapter 1. Wagon. A red brick city rising from the frozen wastes, the tundra, seracs, and glaciers, the snowfalls 500 feet deep. In sun now, the glitter of snow coruscating across rusted iron spires and monumental arches and smokestacks, across the salt scar, across colossal pillars of steam supporting a dead heaven. In sun, for now, though thunderheads heap at the horizon and darken slowly as the afternoon yellows, making ready to advance. On radar, the coming tempest is a solid mass, dirty storm, the snow contaminated with radioactive dust. Best not to go outside if you want to live your 60 years. The scale of it all obliterating on the scopes. The station calls it as a 3-day storm. Chapter 2. War Council. She still thought of herself as a factory girl from Gig Mill. She wasn't meant to look at maps of the city or make decisions. In her dreams, she still unloaded bales of salvaged cloth in the loading dock, still pitchforked fibers from the combine to the carding drum. In her nightmares, she still screamed and pounded at the factory door as stacks of fibers went up incandescent and the black smoke boiled over her coworkers. Now, she stood with a rifle in the thigh-deep snow of an abandoned blackening district rooftop, watching the clouds sweep in. That's too much of a risk, said Moncada. He was old by the standards of Wagon. The disease killing him had whitened his hair and paled his skin, the cold getting inside him, as they said. It's too much blood to waste for one man. We're not talking about one man, said Gim. He was hunched at the parapet, heavy shoulders, eroded dark yellow skin, shaggy black hair streaked with gray. We're talking about Taylor. It's one man, said Moncada, but his voice was gentle. Well, what do you two think? Rowena and Ransack 0894 were standing a little apart. Rowena was looking out toward Gig Mill over a jagged skyline. Ransack was spitting red mouthfuls of kachan over the roof's edge, trying to hit the pigeons nestled below. She looked up with bloody teeth. "I say we go. The old man's just scared." Moncada gave her a sad smile. "I'm dying anyway. It's your lives I care about." Gim knocked a handful of snow off the ledge. "We have to get him back, Moncada." "And what if we can't? What if a lot of things?" Ransack jeered. "What do you say, Rowena?" An almost childlike desperation on Gim's pitted face as he turned to her. "What do you think?" She looked down, feeling the pressure of their eyes. They were crystals in the snow. Didn't she owe Taylor? He was the one who brought her, half burnt out of the cold. And to be honest, she wasn't sure what the cause was without him. "Rowena?" She looked to the side. Those clouds were getting close. "I guess I agree with Gim." Afterward, she'd never forget that final hour of sunlight, or the sad smile Moncada gave her as she avoided his eye. Chapter 3. Onset. First sign was when the radio began to go. Rowena was changing the oil on an old marmot when static began to infect the tinny music. Everybody took their turn maintaining the vehicles, just like everybody took their turn cooking and cleaning and blowing shit up. Rowena liked the greasework best. Too much fire and smoke when you cooked or blew shit up. By the time she finished wiping her hands on an old cloth, everyone in the warehouse was looking up. Dark flakes were whipping past beyond the glass block windows, and the signals had decayed to a ceaseless, anguished groan. And Gim put down his cup of black drink and walked across the cement floor. Footsteps echoed in the wide bay. When he turned the dial toward off, it seemed to resist him for a moment. Then the click came, like something final. "There it is, then. Storm's begun." He glanced around. 20 or 30 equals, all of them solemn except for Ransack, who grinned through her filed teeth. "Let's go." She was wires and white skin, red hair shaved close to the scalp. "Let's fucking do this thing." But Gim wasn't so impulsive. "You all know what the stakes are going to be for this. Make sure you're ready to commit. Not everyone will make it back." Rowena put down the cloth and took up her rifle. The equals always kept their weapons close to hand. Now the gun felt heavier than it should. Cleaned, oiled, and locked, all bound with gray cloth. She could still see Taylor's hands as he showed her how to take apart and reassemble the piece. Like this. Listen for that click. That's how you'll know it's seated properly. She could still feel the gentle nudge of those hands as he adjusted her form. Load, lock, snip to the cheek, and breathe and shoot. Patiently coaching her until the muscle memory was crisp and perfect, until she could be certain not to waste the few rounds a month they had to practice with. "Reese!" he'd always shout when she put her bullet to the target. Always Reese, and never Rowena, that extra bit of distance, which let you know the boundary was safe between you. She could still feel the concussion of light artillery the day they took him, and Moncada's hand on her shoulder. "This way, Reese. The battle's over. Time to go." Maybe the others all had memories of their own, because wordlessly, and one by one, they also took their rifles up. Chapter 4. Recon. Less than an hour after the first flurries, Rowena and Ransack were screaming out ahead of the convoy on a refurbed marmot, half drunk on the smell of diesel, with the blizzard all around them. Ransack was driving, Rowena riding pillion with a rifle unslung. They had less than 40 yards of visibility. The wind was up, rough. The heavy flakes ripped diagonal against the gray, glowing sky. All the streets were empty. In every window, the mercury had dropped, and the Geiger was slowly ticking over. Blades of orange sodium cut across the whiteout. Hulks of old buildings loomed up, then faded out against the whiteness. Through her mask, Rowena could smell the snow, the coldness, freshness. The gentle sound of falling flakes was so loud you could almost hear it over the marmot's engine. Ransack wasn't dressed warmly enough. She had a black cap stuffed down over her scalp, and a black bomber half-zipped over a loose black sweater and wiry ribs. She wasn't wearing a mask, so when she glanced back to grin at Rowena, the branded numbers on her cheeks, 08 and 94, looked black in the orange glow. The catch-on kept her warm, Rowena guessed, and the red drool was dark as wind dragged it back along Ransack's cheeks. It roared out through the half-abandoned sprawl of the blackening district. Up ahead, the promontories of Radar Drum and Airkirk looked like giants in the haze, crowned with pale lights. The cattleways cut between them down into Cokes, but the road was empty today, and the refineries were cold. Snow muffled the marmot's howl. Even under Ransack's sure hand, the vehicle sometimes skidded in the fine powder. It passed hog slaughtering plants, silent and crystalled in the storm. 11 inches of snow was almost enough to keep the smell of blood tamped down, but you could still catch the reek of it from time to time. Ransack wasn't grinning backward anymore, and Rowena knew why. These factories were where they'd put the numbers on her face, where she'd worked 8 years at the hammers without a nickel's pay. 14 hours times 365 times 8. Rowena wondered how many pigs that added up to, hammered right between the eyes. But then they were through to Slush, where tenements rose beside the frozen tailing ponds, and Keep Cully, that nest of streets that kept its red lights burning even now. Maybe Ransack was lucky. Others in the cause had done indentured years beneath the crimson glow. But one thing the two riders didn't see anywhere as they roared through Wagon was the Stats Police. Not an armored tractor or a cruiser or even a marmot with a miserable flatfoot wrapped up tight. Even when they reached Cross Dishonest and the transformer station silent in the snow, their ancient enemy was nowhere seen. Ransack pulled up slow. The transformer station lights were out, and the booth beside the gate was empty. "Look at that," she said. "There's no one home. 2 good hours of snow and the state withdraws." "Could be a trap," Rowena said. "It's not a trap." Ransack killed the engine. "You're just that smug and lazy." She swung a long leg over the saddle and started to knock snow from the saddlebags. Rowena said, "We should wait for the others." "You can wait." The sky's gray was fading, and Ransack's face looked blue, her stained, smiling lips the color of weak dead flesh. She drew forth a set of bolt cutters and an aerosol of foam. She seemed so certain of herself, and Rowena envied that sureness, so strongly that the taste of envy was a bitter oil on her tongue. "Do you think he's still alive?" she blurted. She meant Taylor, of course. Ransack hesitated. "Honestly, no." Her black eyes were affectless. "Honestly, I think he's dead, and that's if he's lucky. I think he told them everything he knew, and then he died." "You're wrong about that," Rowena said. "Not Taylor, never him." Ransack shrugged. "There's nothing personal. I'd say the same of anyone. But if we do find him tonight, you won't recognize your hero anymore." "How can you just say things like that?" Rowena was surprised by the heat in her own voice. "Taylor brought you in too." But Ransack leaned close, showing teeth. "Well, that's what makes me special, Reese. In, out, it doesn't really matter much. I do the same things either way." Then she was gone through the snow, her jagged figure crouching at the chain-link fence. For a long moment, Rowena didn't follow, even though you were always supposed to stick with your teammate. She was that sick of Ransack's shit, always seeing the ugly side of everything, and pretending that she liked that ugliness just fine. But what she'd said about Taylor weighed on Rowena's mind. They'd both seen what Stot's pole could do to you, and what you could become. By the time she pulled herself together and lurched after Ransack through the snow, the fence was holed and the transfer station door was forced. When she climbed through and made it to that door, the snow was blowing through it in a long, dim hall. Somewhere up ahead, she heard raised voices. There was a flash of light and the blunt crack of a 4-shot repeater. Rowena threw herself against the wall and brought her rifle up. And the power went, The bare bulb on the hallway ceiling died. "Ransack, you good?" "I'm good." It was Ransack's voice that echoed down the cement walls. "We're clear." Rowena relaxed a little and straightened. There was the sound of spray foam and then the clang of an empty canister. A moment later, Ransack reappeared, cutters tucked beneath one arm, whistling tuneless as she fed a fresh cartridge into the repeater's silver breech. By the snow's dim glow, Rowena could just make out her face. She looked the way some people did after a good lay. Trouble? Not at all. The handgun clicked, and Ransack lightly punched her shoulder on the way past. "Let's radio the others, comrade. Let them know the way to Bridewell's open." Chapter 5. Friction. The rest of the convoy was running dark, traveling by snowplow, gut instinct, and knowledge of the streets. Surprise was their only hope. They couldn't risk a chain of headlights. 4 growlers were packed with fighters and gear, and they also had a half a dozen marmots loaded with 2 or 3 shooters each. It felt like a strong force, and it was. It was everything they could muster, without the security risk of bringing in comrades from Leadhaven or the freightings. But Rowena knew how fast this force would melt beneath the heat of Stotspole armor, Stotspole guns. For the moment, everything was stalled into the ruins of Marrow and Reason Street. One of the growlers had cracked an axle, and hasty repairs were underway by the glow of hooded lanterns. Gim was pacing, anxious as Ransack and Reese climbed off the marmot and waded through the snow toward him. "Power's gone," he shouted, pulling down his scarf and pointing to the dead windows and streetlights. "Is that you?" "You're welcome," shouted Ransack. "Should have waited for backup." Ransack jerked her chin at the jacked-up growler. "You need something to put you ahead of schedule. Take the win." She turned to Rowena. "Look after this guy, would you? I gotta find a snowbank." Gim ignored her exit, watching the equal struggle with her broken axle. Something dark flickered in his eyes. "I'll send someone out to get that power back. Half an hour after that, this whole corridor will be swarmed with special squad." He looked up at Reese. Was it fucked? Should we just call the operation off? She didn't know how to answer. Suddenly, the weight of responsibility felt heavy on her shoulders. She didn't want to get her comrades killed. She opened her mouth to say something, but then, out of the howling wind, Moncada was suddenly beside them. He looked bigger in his winter clothes, with rags of patchwork whirling in the storm. "One nice thing about this weather," he shouted, "it works against the Stotspole, too." Rowena felt her spirits lift a little. "Ransack thinks I won't send someone to the storms out," she shouted at Gim, "so they don't care if shamble workers freeze in the dark." But Gim's heavy frame was closed. If Taylor was here, he'd know what to do. He glanced up at the old man. "What do you think, Moncada? Is our cover blown? Should we turn back?" But the old man gave him nothing. "It's your op, Gim. It's up to you." Shit. The big man turned away, scanning the crumbled outline of the rooftops, as if Taylor might suddenly appear. He turned back, looking around at all the people he was responsible for. "You know, I never asked for any of this. I didn't want to lead shit. I just wanted to be a good soldier." Ransack appeared out of the snow and came to stand beside Reese, chewing on a fresh red cube. Shit. Gim wiped snow from his face. "Taylor would know what to do, right? So, we go and get Taylor out. Then this'll all be his fucking problem. What do you say?" Moncada said nothing. Ransack shrugged. Rowena told him, "We'll do what you tell us, Gim." Chapter 6. Watcher. A few moments later, the downed growler roared back to life, but the snow was only falling heavier, the cold only growing deeper. All the windows of Wagon were dark. Only the dim glow of fires and storm lamps showed behind the weight of heavy curtains or around the gaps of boarded windows. The rads were getting high by now. Anybody out was shortening their life by months, not minutes. Nobody looked out to the streets to see the convoy rumble past. Nobody wanted to witness whatever might be done on the roads in the midst of a 3-day storm. But not so far away. A lone figure traveled to the broken pillars of the bombed-out marrow works, and feeling the vibration underneath his feet, looked up to see the jagged silhouettes of marmots and growlers trawling past, the shoulder-slung rifles and rags like spears with pennons blowing. He had been a person, once, until the Staatspol took him. He still didn't know what the crime had been. He wore no coat or boots. Coarse white fur had grown from his skin ever since his time in the vats. His front teeth had protruded. His jaw had lost its shape. There were cancers bursting out all through his bowel tract, and when he shat, 6 or 7 times a day these days, it came out into the snow in reddish streaks. He didn't know what to make of his circumstances now. Ever since the vats, a heavy fog had hung across his mind. But he felt something as he watched those banners pass, some rising flutter in his chest. He no longer had the words to name that feeling. But then he saw which way the shadows headed, and that light feeling gave way to horror. They were heading for where he feared above all other places. They were heading for the greenish light that shone through banks of vats, for the men with clubs and arcing prods, for the place where they used you as a mop for your own soiled cell, for the forced feedings and worse violations to the sound of laughter. He moaned with dread, and rolled his swollen eyes and bent his head and loped off through the snow. And so, unseen, the convoy rumbled on, to concrete walls and iron bars and hidden deeps. 2. Chapter 7. Bridewell Called. Concrete prison on the edge of Wagon, edge of the waste, sharp corners scored smooth by decades of howling ice and dust. The high walls, crenellated towers with their heavy guns asleep so lightly underneath their tarps, drooling with razor wire, the slits for rifles like many a black and eager eye, the steel doors a gagged and grinning mouth. Bridewell called. Many enter. Few have ever left. Chapter 8. Overwatch. Rowena half-crawled, half-swam through fresh powder. Iron hedgehogs caught the blowing snow and dust in chest-high drifts and made for cover from the eyeline of the walls and slits. She came up to one knee, sighted along the battlements with a handheld greenscope, the towers and murder holes. A small breath of disbelief escaped her. They were empty. She thumbed a catch on the scope, switching from green to thermograph, and everything through the lens went purple-black. No warm orange body loitered at any window slit. No greenish sentry wrapped against the cold, huddled by the canvassed guns. She let the scope sink to her chest. Ransack had been right. The Staatspol had no idea they were coming. Staatspol were bundled up warm somewhere, cozy in the thought of their armored cav and heavy guns and special squad and good old-fashioned white terror. The Staatspol didn't even dream that a sucker punch was swinging at their jaw. She put away the scope and pulled the radio. Clicked twice. The storm static would drown out any voice, as they used simple binary codes of clicks. A few chirps came back her way, interrogative. She replied, confirmed. A few moments later, other scouts came up, 17 and Vagrant Child, both former dentures like Ransack. They had numbers on their cheeks. She spoke a few moments with them in low voices. The walls stayed empty. Must be warm, wherever they are, said Vagrant Child, spitting out a mouthful of quid. Yeah, let's keep them that way. The scouts nodded and slithered back into the cold. A few moments later, Gim came up. Give me the scope. I gotta see this for myself. She handed over the eyepiece, and he scanned the empty walls. Holy shit, he laughed under his breath. Holy shit, we've caught them jacking off. He handed back the scope. They've been preparing charges and gas tanks and a thermal lance back there. But we don't need any of that shit. Just a ladder, said Rowena. Gim shook his head. He looked giddy. The hours were ticking past, and no one knew how deep to the storm they were by now. They'd all begun dipping into their supply of stims. Just a fucking ladder, he breathed. And he reached out and grabbed Rowena by the shoulder. "We're gonna get him back, Reese. I can't believe it, but we're gonna get him back." She smiled weakly at him, and he grinned, and lumbered off back under the veil of storm. She checked her weapons. She remembered Taylor's keen and thoughtful gaze as he pored over blueprints. A few minutes later, something monstrous loomed up out of the fog. It was one of their growlers, a huge, rust-colored transport plow with steel-cleated treads. This one had a pneumatic boom ladder mounted on one shoulder, and a half-dozen equals riding up on top with their rifles and breech guns at the ready. On a clear day, the vehicle's roar would have been deafening. But now, with the storm shrieking in across the wastes, its sound blended into the general roar. Rowena broke cover and fell in behind the vehicle as it passed. A ragged column of shooters was emerging with her from the swirl like ghosts. Up close, she could feel the rumble of steel treads through her feet. Someone inside would hear it, she was sure. They'd pour out along the parapet in just a moment. Their rifles would crack, and then the heavy guns would... But then the growler was below the gates, and the boom lurched up first, then outward, down to kiss the crenels of the wall, and a figure Rowena knew was Ransack vaulted over. And then the others swarmed behind her, and Rowena was scrabbling up iron rungs in the side of the growler and lurching up the slick aluminum handholds of the boom. When she made the rampart, comrades were wading through the snow and breaking the tower doors with handheld rams. Rifles were covering the steel doors and narrow windows of the 2-story concrete block across the courtyard. And then the equals had the heavy guns up top in hand, and the canvases were coming off, and the oiled bearings grinding with the snow as multi-barreled Gatlings wheeled inward. The gates were opened from within, and marmots shot through, gliding into the courtyard heavy with shooters, and 2 of them technicals, with puckle guns mounted at the stern. Ransack was down across the courtyard already, posted up along the steel doors, and Vagrant Child with her, both of them armed with chrome 4-shot repeaters. Rowena half slid down the rampart steps, then waded past the technicals, rifle pointed at the windows overhead. Then she was in position behind Vagrant Child with 17. And there was a moment of silence as everybody turned to look at Gim, who had gathered Moncada and another dozen fighters at a second door. He hesitated, and the yard was filled with the hush of falling snow. And Ransack shouted, "Fuck are we waiting for?" and hauled the handle of the steel door. Chapter 9. Surprise with a Z. The door was unlocked, unexpectedly, inevitably. It ripped right open on oiled hinges, revealing a dim light of gas lamps down a hallway. Someone was standing in the entrance, a Stotspole officer, in his gray-white Sayers uniform and fur wedge cap, with an overcoat draped across his shoulders. He was a good-looking man. He had a cigarette in one hand and steel lighter in the other. He looked out at the dozens of knives and rifle barrels facing him. He blinked. The cigarette slid between his fingers. Then Ransack 0894 stepped forward and smiled up into his face, with the gaslight flickering red on her filed teeth. "Hey, handsome. How's it going?" Then she put the 4 barrels of her pistol to his sternum and blew his heart out the back of his chest. "Let's fucking go!" And everything was shouting and panic and bodies pouring down through the concrete halls in a large gaslit room filled with men in white uniforms scrambling for their guns as shapes in gray rags surged through and bullets and slugs and knives were ripping through white cloth. 17's head erupted, spraying Rowena with flecks of wet skull, and she shouldered her rifle, snapped to the cheek, and breathe and shoot. She could feel Taylor's calm presence at her shoulder as the rifle fired in silence, and death ripped through the left blue eye of the man who just killed 17. "Keep going!" Ransack shouted. "Push through!" She had her dirk beneath the ribcage of a Stotspole sub-lieutenant. They were shouting on the second story now, and outside on the captured towers, spinning guns cracked out in antiphon, shattering glass and enfilading the upper level of the barracks. But the alarm was raised by now. Beyond the concrete block, a second courtyard opened up before a low gray structure, and more Stotspole rushed up its sunken steps into the snow, firing at Rowena and the equals as they took up posts beside the shattered windows of their captured building and fired back. There were so many. Rowena fired blindly and hit someone. Poppies bloomed amongst the snow. Another equal died beside her. His name was Tosh, and she realized just how outnumbered they had been. How stupid they had been to attack this place. But she kept firing, hearing Taylor's voice each time she turned the bolt and slid a cartridge home. Cement dust flowered from the edges of the windows, but the courtyard had turned into a rat chute, and the snow was turning to red-pink slush, and now the Staatspool were outnumbered and trying to run. But the snow slowed them, and the equals all had scores to settle. Then came silence. The roaring faded in Rowena's ear. A few isolated cracks rang out behind her and above. She heard Gim's voice shouting orders on the second floor. She lowered her rifle, looked down at Taj's body, back at 17's. Ransack didn't look back. She was already striding out across the courtyard, calmly racking cartridges into her gun. Rowena shouted after her. "We should wait for Gim to clear the second story." "Don't fuss," said Ransack. "He's got it taken care of." Chapter 10. White Tide. The others followed her toward that low gray building, and Rowena reluctantly went with them. When she was halfway through the red slush, trying not to look into any dead eyes, a door opened to greet them. Ransack had just been reaching for its handle. Now it was her turn to stop and stare, surprised. "Oh. Hey." A wild-eyed man in uniform trousers and undershirt stared back. He was breathing heavily. A heartbeat later, as Ransack raised her gun to kill him, dogs surged from the room behind, flowing around and bounding above the level of his hips in a tide of white fur, of black eyes and red mouths. Ransack had time to crush the trigger once, and then the dogs were over her, and she was borne down as they flooded through the courtyard, swimming through the snow and lurching into the crack of rifles, and soaring for the equals' swaddled throats. Everything slowed as one of the dogs launched itself in a plume of snow. Rowena watched it hang in the cold air, jaws hinging slowly open, teeth like shards of broken ice. She tried to raise a protective arm, but the air had turned to sludge. Then the animal hit her. Its weight smashed her back into a snowdrift, and everything was fast again. Pressure, thrashing weight, the jaws crushed her forearm. She felt Radius and Ulna grind together somewhere deep, but couldn't feel fangs through the heavy coat sleeve. Was she screaming? She couldn't hear herself. Who was it that fished the dirk from its sheath and pressed it into her mittened hand? She could have sworn it was Taylor, crouched beside her. But however it got there, the blade was in her grip, and she drove it up, drove it in. Thick fur, tough skin, and sturdy bone. But she worked the point around till something gave, and the point sank deep. Suddenly she was warm as blood soaked through her coat. Suddenly she was cold as the storm ripped its heat away. She flailed with the knife. The dog's heavy neck threw her this way and that like a rag doll. But then she found the soft spot underneath its jaws, and the dagger's point went all the way. It took a long time for the dog to stop moving. When Rowena made it to her feet, the thick pink slush of the courtyard was whitening already with freshly fallen snow. She felt gunshots as pulses on the air more than heard them as sounds, as bullets whipped down from the second level, tearing through white coats and snarling skulls. One of the beasts had snout in Ransack's entrails, and she unthinkingly pulled her repeater and shot it dead. She looked around blankly at the ruin of her comrades. Then Gim's people from upstairs were down around her. Someone was at her shoulder, shouting. She turned hollow eyes to see Moncada's face. He was saying something, muffled by the melting snow in her ears. Chapter 11. Waif. Are you hurt? Can you hear me, Reese? Are you hurt? She looked down and realized her coat and pants were black with freezing blood. She raised her mauled arm. It hurt to move, but when she shrugged it out of the shredded sleeve, the skin was unbroken. She nodded silently, and Moncada reached into his coat. He pressed a square of waif into her good hand. We've got a long way to go, Rowena. Stay with us, yeah? She looked down. Golden biscuit, bloody fingers. When she raised it to her lips, the waif tasted how she imagined a warm sun might feel. She sat on a concrete bollard and numbly ate. "Clear this building," Gim was shouting, striding forward. 4x4. Go carefully. He looked confident and calm now that the action had started, holding his people's morale together despite their losses. His shooters breached the doors of the low gray building and flowed through. A few shots rang out, but Gim didn't flinch. It was moments like these when she understood why he'd been Taylor's right-hand man. He was cool under fire. He just went to pieces without it. Not far from where she sat, Ransack stared up at the dead heaven, smiling. "That's what makes me special, Reese. In, out, it doesn't really matter much. Alive or dead either, it seemed." Rowena couldn't decide if she still envied her. She wiped crumbs from her fingers on her bloody coat and stood. Then she pulled her dirk up out of the dead dog's neck and wiped it off and sheathed it. She checked her rifle, just like Taylor had shown her how to do. There was a long way yet ahead, down into the frozen guts of Bridewell Cold. But suddenly, she found that she was ready to keep going. The Wrong Station is made possible with the generous support of our listeners on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/thewrongstation for bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes content, ad-free listening, and additional goodies celebrating our decade of dread. This week's episode, Action Crisis White, Part 1, was written by Alexander Saxton and performed by Anthony Botelho. Thank you to Sarah Basham, Larry Mattingly, Gabriel Fitzgerald, Amanda Miller, Jacobo Lopez, Jackie Blue Sky, and a very special thanks to Ransack and Vagrant Child for helping us keep the lights, well, off. The Wrong Station is co-produced by Alexander Saxton, Anthony Botelho, and Jacob Duarte Spiel, with music composed and performed by Alon Citrin, and arranged for the viola and performed by Viola Schmidt. You can follow us on social media at The Wrong Station, or email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.